Are we gonna have this before or after?
We can do it after, because we only have 2 applications.
Let's dispense with
David,
it.
how many committees are you liaison to?
This zoning and theoretically the Board of Education.
Oh my gosh.
You're a busy man.
He's a busy man.
Can I ask a question? The theoretical part. What?
The Board of Education used to have all its meetings on Monday.
Right.
And then a past president of the board moved it to Tuesdays. You open this. Zoning is the first Tuesday of every month. And my board is the second and fourth Tuesday.
So you.
That's why I
Thank
said
you.
theoretical.
So you're there in spirit.
Not that often I can get from Board of
Got it.
Education meetings. And then they complain, well, how come nobody ever comes to our meetings? You guys moved it to a day when all of us could make it.
That's a fair point.
Thanks. All right, will do. Okay, welcome to the Village of Rybrook Planning Board meeting. Let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to those few in the audience and to members of the public at home. We do have streaming videos, so we have no idea really what our audience is, right?
Right.
Could be tremendous numbers. Board members in attendance tonight are John Gerzan, Donald Crum, Scott Mendelson, Matthew Retner, Jeffrey Richmond, Amy Schoen. And full house tonight. And also in attendance is Drew Gammels, our village attorney, our superintendent of public works, Michael Nowak, and sitting in for Sarah, Mr. Malcolm Simpson as our planning board consultant. Thank you for coming.
Hi, Malcolm, welcome.
Malcolm, yeah. We only have 2 matters on today. We do have minutes, though. Oh, sorry, David. David Heiser, a liaison to the Board of Trustees. Who's that's true, that's true. Do you have to leave right after our meeting, or can we?
I'm going to try to leave around 7:45 at the latest, so I can get this admin.
Okay, you'll be able to do that. There is an issue we may want your input on. We do have minutes of September 8th, 2022. Are there any modifications, proposal for revisions? Can I have the, yes?
These are very brief minutes.
Yes,
Yeah, they are not verbatim.
no, because we're no longer governed by the COVID
Okay.
virtual meeting rules.
Those were
so-
novels, or novellas, actually.
Those were, yes, yeah, and I still, to this day, commend our
Oh,
village
and
staff
it's an
for being able to
impossible
put
job. It
those
really
things
is impossible.
together, and being up to date, because I think we are up to date,
Yeah.
which is amazing, so, anyway, thank you,
I would just
Tara
like to say
et
good,
al.
exactly, a good job to Tara and
Absolutely.
everybody else who's done the minutes in the village.
Right.
It was a lot on them and doing their day-to-day jobs, so
Sure.
everybody did a great job.
Yeah,
I believe Tara, Rose,
The
Alex,
characteristics of
everybody.
the meeting,
Yep.
and I move that we approve it.
absolutely. Can I have a motion and a second?
I did. I
He
didn't make
made the
I
motion,
didn't-
Okay.
second.
Mr. Grzan,
Yes.
Mr. Crum,
Yes.
Mr. Mendelson,
Yes.
Mr. Retner,
Yes.
Mr. Richmond,
I'm going to abstain.
Ms. Schoen,
Yes.
Chairman Goodman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Our first matter is 32 Lincoln Avenue. Can I have a motion and a second to open the public hearing, which I think has been scheduled for this matter? I don't think
Moved.
we did it last time.
Second.
Okay.
Mr. Grzan,
Yes.
Mr. Crum,
Yes.
Mr. Mendelson,
Yes.
Mr. Retner,
Yes.
Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
Ms. Schoen,
Yes.
Chairman Goodman.
Yes.
Just,
Sir, go ahead.
I just want to, I'm sorry. I'm
go
just
right
gonna
ahead.
probably say what he was about to say. On Tuesday, this application was before the zoning board. of appeals. It did receive a variance,
Yeah.
which is why it's back before this board.
Okay, great. Okay.
Okay, John Scarlato Jr., the architect for the Martinos, who own the property. So I'll go through. So, these are the photos of the front of the house. It's Lincoln Avenue, so we have the vegetative buffer of the first 35 feet from the property line. So the house has the fence, it has the hedge, it has layers of shrubbery. This is what you're seeing from the road. We're looking at, this is the existing K-turn that is there now, which is what we're proposing to move, make bigger, move closer to the right and create 2 parking spaces. And an area that you can get in and out of the driveway and turn cars out so you don't have to back down the driveway, which is what the issue is an avenue. So those are the pictures. Go to
Mr. Scarlato,
Yep.
what exactly did the zoning board approve? I did not see the resolution or what exactly. Did they approve widening of the turning lane? Did they approve the parking space? What exactly did you ask and what did they approve?
We went for a 10-foot variance to have the parking violate the 35-foot front yard setback. So in other words, our parking's at 25 foot into our front yard as opposed to 35. Now in Rybrook, most zones is 25. You have to be 25 feet in before you park. So we're kind of just consistent with Rybrook's code. The reason it was 35 feet is because of the vegetative buffer, because we're on Lincoln Avenue, Ridge Street, King Street, and I think Hawthorne are vegetative buffer zones, which increases the buffer to 35 foot, and it increases, I think, your front yard setbacks 1.5 times. Right. So you're at a kind of a disadvantage. The other disadvantage with this site is if you look at the drawing,
No,
we have a
I'm
wetland.
familiar with the site, but
Right.
what did they exactly approve? Did they approve
they-
additional parking space or did they approve the turning lane so you don't have to
Parking.
back up?
They
approved
approved the
parking.
parking space in the 10 foot,
Right.
10 foot into the 35 foot.
I mean, technically, they just
They-
approved the
The reduction of the 10
reduction of
feet.
the
Right,
setback.
right.
But Drew, were you at that meeting?
Yes, I was.
What was the, yeah,
We all were.
what was the nature of the discussion that
Sure.
ensued with the ZBA concerning?
So the Zoning Board of Appeals evaluated the 5 factors, coming out with a determination that this request would not have an impact on the character of the neighborhood because it can't be seen from the road due to the landscaping proposed. While they did see it as substantial, it would not have a substantial impact on the community. It didn't offer any environmental concerns. So their analysis of the balancing test was in favor of the applicant, and they also believe that for safety reasons, this is designed so that they can turn and come, face first. That's not the right phrase. Thank you. Front end, nose first, out of the driveway, because Lincoln Avenue is so busy, and that was the focus of the zoning board's discussion.
Well, actually, to John's point, and is that the zoning resolution doesn't really analyze the 5 factors. We just know what the determination is.
It goes through and pretty much circles that it will, that
Yeah,
it
the variance will not
Will
create
not
an
create-
adverse impact to character, okay. Cannot be achieved through any other, okay. But
Yep.
for instance, if there was a safety concern, that wouldn't be included in this.
Because I don't think it's within the purview of the zoning board to approve it as a parking. I think they can approve the variance. Now, whether that is going to be
That's what
a
they did.
parking space or a turning lane, I think that's more of a site plan issue, and that's a planning board issue.
all the zoning board did was to approve a 10-foot setback to allow, 10-foot setback variance to allow them to have this area in the scene, in the buffer area.
Thank you.
And that's it. So the zoning board's not saying, yes, you can park there, yes, you can do.
No, it isn't designated for parking. It's
Exactly.
just designated to go out.
The
to go
hammerhead
in
is
10 feet.
designed for the turnaround specifically.
Because as much as I am in favor of a safety, and I expressed my point of view at the last meeting, I am concerned with what Don said at the last meeting that, that we may not be setting a precedence where everybody now wants 5 parking spaces in the front of their home, where only 2 may be allowed by the code.
And the zoning board's discussion did not focus on, they asked questions about would this be used for parking? How many cars does the property owner have? What's the need for the area? But they also focused on things that went more towards the factors, such as landscaping, and that's what would separate this out from other applications.
I don't think that we can regulate it. I personally would prefer to see that as a turning lane and not a permanent parking spot. That would be my preference. Who's going to regulate? Nobody.
And especially because you can't see it from Lincoln Avenue.
I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
I'm aware that you can see it, and that's why I don't have a problem with the turning lane, because it's shielded. It's just the way it's looking at the plan.
Yeah, as I understand, Sarah, in our discussion, our pre-agenda discussion, that the screening proposed was adequate to completely screen the parking spaces. Is that correct? My understanding of that?
That's what she relayed to me. That's what she had relayed to me, that not only is there additional landscaping being added, but there's existing landscaping being moved.
Yeah, we had
We
discussed
had to move the
that.
2 trees that were
Last meeting,
put in when
right.
the house was built.
Right, okay. Does the board have any additional questions for the applicant or comments? Okay. Does any member of the public want to speak to this application? Okay. Drew, do we have a resolution?
We sure do.
Okay. I guess we can have a motion and a second to close the public hearing.
Moved.
Second.
All right, here we go. I will summarize. Oh,
Well, we need
Yes.
we need to
Yes.
roll
Mr.
call.
Grzan, Mr. Crum? This to close the public hearing.
Oh, closed, yes.
Mr. Mendelson?
Yes.
Mr. Retner?
Yes.
Mr. Richmond?
Yes.
Michonne?
Yes.
Chairman Goodman?
Yes.
Thank you.
all right. Whereas an application for approval of a site plan for the expansion of a driveway to create 2 conforming parking spaces on the property located at 32 Lincoln Avenue in the R12 zoning district in the Scenic Roads Overlay District was submitted to the planning board. Whereas the planning board is the approval authority for the site plan pursuant to the sections of the village code referenced herein. Whereas the planning board reviewed the plans and application materials set forth in the resolution. And whereas the application is a Type 2 action pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, thereby requiring no further environmental review. And whereas the village planning consultant, village staff, and the planning board reviewed the plans and application materials submitted. And whereas on February 7th, 2023, the Village of Rybrook Zoning Board of Appeals granted a 10-foot vegetative buffer variance where the minimum required vegetative buffer is 35 feet pursuant to village code. And whereas a duly advertised public hearing was open on the site plan on February 9th, 2023, at which time all those wishing to be heard on the application were given such opportunity, and the public hearing was closed on February 9th, 2023. And whereas the planning board has considered the site plan review standards set forth at Chapter 209 of the Village Code, and whereas the planning board has considered the Scenic Roads Overlay District standards set forth in the Village Code, particularly in relation to the visibility of the expanded driveway and parking spaces in the Lincoln Avenue Scenic Roads Overlay District. And whereas the planning board is fully familiar with the application and all aspects of the project. Now therefore, be it resolved that the Village of Rybrook Planning Board hereby approves the site plans listed herein for the expansion of the driveway to create 2 conforming parking spaces on the property located at 32 Lincoln Avenue, subject to the following conditions. The applicant shall submit a construction management plan to the satisfaction of the village building inspector and superintendent of public works. Be it further resolved that no permit shall be issued until the applicant has paid to the village all applicable fees and professional review fees incurred in connection with review of this application. Be it further resolved, during construction, the village building inspector or superintendent of public works may authorize, upon the written request of the applicant, minor changes to the approved site plan, Such minor modifications shall be consistent with the design and intent of the approved site plan. The architect or engineer of record shall submit the approved changes on a set of as-built plans, which plans shall be maintained in the permanent file of the building department. All changes to the site plan, other than minor changes described herein, shall require approval of a site plan amendment by the planning board. Be it further resolved, all construction shall be performed in accordance with all approved plans and land use approvals. Any approved amendments thereto and field changes authorized and approved by the building inspector, the superintendent of public works, or their designee shall be in writing. Any applicant who violates this resolution may be issued a stop work order and summons in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 91 of the Village Code. Be it further resolved that this resolution shall supersede conflicting provisions of the Village Code.
Any comments on the resolution?
Just one comment. Back to John's point, I'm in favor of this resolution, but can you just say, instead of saying whereas additional parking has been authorized, can you just say whereas the enlarged driveway as shown on the site plan has been authorized?
It's not only one, it's 2 parking spaces.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I thought we were
Instead of
talking about
referring
one.
to
No,
the
but
additional parking, can they refer to the
I
additional
wondered about that
driveway?
myself in the resolution. If it's not parking spaces we're approving, and the zoning board created the variance, I'm wondering about that too, whether we should in fact say it another way.
Just to say,
It was in the whereas and it was in the.
Yeah.
yeah, so
in the
that
beginning.
it's the site plan for the expansion of the driveway on the property.
Yeah.
Maybe just leave it at
Yeah,
that.
I think that is better.
I agree.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we'll take
Yeah.
your point.
Okay, I've made that change.
Okay. We have a second?
Did we have a motion?
Yeah, let's have a motion.
Moved.
Second.
Mr. Grzan,
Yes,
Mr. Crum,
Yes.
Mr. Mendelson.
Yes.
Mr. Retner.
Yes.
Mr. Richmond.
Yes.
Ms. Schoen.
Yes.
Chairman Goodman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, good luck.
Good luck, John.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.
The semantics.
Words mean things. That's what they say. Okay, our next item and last item is 44 Rock Ridge Drive. And I think a public hearing has also been scheduled for tonight. For that, let's wait for Mike to get back to his seat, and we'll open the public hearing.
Night.
Oh, is it? No, they have. So you can just,
So we can do the iPhone up there.
or you could do, as opposed to say.
Oh.
There you go.
That's gonna be super.
Whoa.
I know.
Little computers.
They got both of them
Wow,
working
on a
now.
phone. Amazing.
That's amazing.
That's,
Technology, amazing.
that's excellent.
Okay, ready, Mike?
Destruction of
We'll open
mankind.
the public hearing on this, I think.
Thank you.
Have a motion and a second to open the public hearing on this matter?
Second.
Tag team here.
yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Go ahead. I love it.
Only this one time.
Okay, good evening, members of the board. My name is Gregory Caccioppoli, design engineer on the project at 44 Rock Ridge Drive. Last time I was here in front of the board, there were some comments from engineering, Mr. Nowak and Hardesty Hanover, regarding the square footage of disturbance within the wetland buffer and how we were going to mitigate that. But actually, let me take a step back and explain again what the project was for the record. So what we're proposing here is to add a proposed patio at 398 square feet in the rear. and sidewalks on either side of the home, left and the right-hand side of the home, with associated stormwater, which is now located in the front, which was part of Mr. Nowak's comments. So, just to go back to those comments for a second. So, I did, one of the requests was to design for a 25-year storm and actually capture all impervious surfaces on the lot, not just what we were proposing. So I went back and captured the entire lot as opposed to only what was proposed. Perk tests were performed. I provided the information associated with that. It looked. Oh, he didn't like the fact that I put dry wells within the wetland buffer, and also it's a recommendation of the DEC that you don't do that. So I moved the dry wells outside of the wetland buffer, and we wound up with a disturbance of 830 square feet of within the wetland buffer. And to mitigate that, we're proposing.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, are dry wells and rechargers the same thing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So, here are the dry wells here in the front yard, adjacent to the driveway. Here's our wetland buffer line here, right, labeled. And just to give you a bigger picture in relationship
When you
to the
install
rear yard.
those dry wells, you are going to put this grass or sod on the top, so.
Correct.
Yeah.
You don't, yes,
And
they're
we treat that as
Restoration.
restoration and not impervious, but impervious, yes.
No,
Nope, it's grass.
Yes, okay, yeah.
correct.
So nobody would ever know that it's there?
No.
Okay, good.
And as part of our mitigation plan, so we're proposing 500 square feet of mitigation within this area here. Okay, and the areas are denoted on the side. 337 square feet of mitigation here in front of the existing green giant arborvitae. And then on the left side of the home, adjacent to the patio, we're proposing another 204 square feet of mitigation in this vicinity. And 344 square feet adjacent to the proposed walkway. Another 192 here. And finally, 108 square feet of mitigation here on the right side of the home, which adds up to this 1,683 square feet, and I believe the required was 1,660. So we did meet the one-to-one.
When you say mitigation.
Oh,
what
2 to
does that
1.
2 to 1,
mean?
I'm sorry, 2 to 1 mitigation requirement.
What exactly are you going to do when you say you're going to mitigate?
They're gonna,
Those are the existing sections of the property or parcels, if you wish. I'm sure there is probably grass or flower beds or something there now. So what are we exactly doing?
That is correct. So typically within our code, there's a restoration requirement where anytime a wetland is disturbed, that applicants put back wetland plantings that will enhance the wetland or the buffer. Grass is not a typical wetland item, okay? You do not find grass or lawn in a wetland. So what our code requires in that instance is for vegetation that is wetland species to be put back, which will better absorb nutrients and byproducts and things out of the waters.
And we
in
can
this
do
your area.
that on this parcel because everything is within the 100-foot buffer zone, correct?
No.
Or is it, are some of these mitigations area outside the buffer zone?
all of the mitigation is within the buffer.
That's what I thought, so that's why you can do
Yes.
it.
Correct.
If this was outside the buffer zone, you could not do it, could you?
I'm not sure.
We have allowed mitigation on
I mean, can I go
properties
to the
with
Rich
some
Park on the
landscaping
top of the
outside.
hill and mitigate there because somebody else is disturbing the wetland? What good is that going to do to that wetland?
No, we have had applicants go into Rich Manor Park.
Well, but
and-
that's still wet.
and do
That's
stuff
still
in
that's
there.
still a wetland area.
You know, we try to be reasonable and accommodating when it comes to applicants. In this case, it's a lot that's what, under a quarter of an acre? Maybe a tenth of an acre? It's a very tight lot. So Ms. Caccioppoli was actually able to shoehorn everything in there. But if you look at the property
Mike,
there.
I understand that. I'm one of those that's not in favor of this 2-to-1. I think it's a pure.
Well, we
okay?
will be discussing that.
Okay,
Gonna be
so
discussing
I don't want to be playing games and forcing the applicant to do something that
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
John, we actually had a discussion amongst ourselves at an agenda meeting about this because it made no sense to anyone
Right.
why it would be a
right.
1-to-1 mitigation in a wetland and a 2-to-1 mitigation in a buffer, which imposed a lot of burdens on, so you anticipated
All
the
right.
discussion we're actually gonna have on
Yes,
That is
that'll be
part
the
of the
training,
training.
and unfortunately, myself and Mr. Caccioppoli have spoken about it, but unfortunately, that's what the code
That's
is.
what right
So
now.
Right now,
That
we
is
cannot,
That is right now.
yes.
I'm sorry, Gregory.
So Mike, just to back up, you reviewed the stormwater management plan, and it's acceptable to you. It's going to do it's going to accomplish 100% capture, and you're not going to be
Yes, it's
any-
outside the buffer, it's 100% capture. We did receive perk test information, and there's, I believe, pre-treatment off the driveway, off the trench drain as well, so yes.
Right, and.
I like that.
Yeah, and Malcolm, from your side, as far as the mitigation planting is concerned, you and Sarah have concluded that the 2-to-1 mitigation has been met, requirement has been met with species that make sense for mitigation planting.
Yeah, we went over the square footage and the species list. Sarah's pleased with all of it.
Yeah, okay. What is the actual disturbance? Because it was I think in your memo, it's,
800.
yeah.
Right,
What is
so,
it? 837,
So we
no, the
Square
total,
feet.
plow beds.
so the total disturbance due to the project
yeah.
was 3,000 plus or minus square feet, but the disturbance within the buffer
Yeah.
was the 830.
Right, that's what I just want to make sure I have the number right, because it says in 837.
Correct.
Got it, okay.
Yes.
All right.
130 flat.
Okay, I'm just going by the memo, Sarah's memo, which says 837, so I don't, whatever it really is, I'll go along with that.
On the right side of the house where there's a tight lot line, it looked like where you circled the sidewalk is going and where the mitigation is going, we're in the same spot. Can you clarify how that section of the lot is being handled?
Sure.
Where those two meet?
So, here, where it's dimensioned 4 feet, that is the width of the proposed walkway, which is butting up against the home. There is a proposed curtain drain adjacent to that walkway, which is 2 foot wide, but again, it's underground, so there's grass above it. And the plantings will be planted in between the walkway and the existing arborvitae. So it can be planted on top of, it can be planted on top
Apropos,
of the curtain
though,
drain.
because we're talking about wetlands,
And
right?
water, right?
Yeah, very
That's
good.
right.
It's all right. So, did I answer your question, or?
Sure. Given that the lot is tight over there,
Right.
is there any concern that adding the walkway in that location could create a disturbance to the neighbor?
No, I'm not worried about disturbing the neighbor, because as part of the plan, we are going to do erosion control and the intensity of the work, for lack of a better word, the labor associated with the installation of that walkway can be done by hand. So it's not like there's going to be.
I meant water disturbance, I'm sorry.
Oh, water. Oh, okay. No, so the purpose of the curtain drain is to capture any runoff coming off of the walkway or impervious surfaces on that end. So if anything, it's going to enhance any issues on the downhill side, which is that side of the property, by capturing runoff. Right.
Thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Doesn't appear to be any members of the public here, but I'll invite him anyway, even in spirit, if any members of the public want to speak to the application. The silence is deafening. Can I have a motion, a second, to close the public hearing?
Moved.
Second.
Mr. Grzan.
Yes.
Mr. Crum.
Yes.
Mr. Mendelson.
Yes.
Mr. Retner.
Yes.
Mr. Richmond.
Yes.
Ms. Schoen.
Yep.
Chairman Goodman.
Yes.
Thank
And Drew, we have our resolution.
Okay, here we go. The applicants have submitted applications for approval of a site plan and wetlands permit for the construction of a patio, bluestone walkway, paver walkway, driveway apron, stormwater system, and landscaping on the property located at 44 Rock Ridge Drive. Whereas the planning board is the approval authority for the site plan and the wetland permit application pursuant to village code. And whereas the planning board reviewed the application materials set forth in the resolution, and whereas the application is a Type 2 action pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, thereby requiring no further environmental review. And whereas the village planning consultant, village staff, and the planning board reviewed the plans and application materials submitted. And whereas a duly advertised public hearing was open on February 9th, 2023, at which time all those wishing to be heard on the application were given such opportunity. And whereas the public hearing was closed on February 9th, 2023. And whereas the proposed patio, bluestone walkway, and paver walkway is located within the 100-foot wetland buffer. And whereas the proposed disturbance of the buffer requires approval of a wetland permit in accordance with Chapter 245 of the Village Code, and mitigation for disturbance of the buffer at a ratio of 2:1. And whereas the proposed total wetland buffer disturbance is 830 square feet, and the applicants will perform 1,683 square feet of on-site mitigation within the buffer zone. And whereas the planning board has considered the wetland permit standards set forth in village code and finds that the applicant proposes sufficient wetland mitigation in compliance with the village code standards, subject to compliance with the conditions set forth herein. And whereas the planning board has considered the site plan review standards set forth at Chapter 209 of the village code. And whereas the planning board is fully familiar with the application in all aspects of the project. Now therefore be it resolved that the Village of Rybrook Planning Board hereby approves the site plans listed herein and a wetland permit for the construction of a patio, bluestone walkway, paver walkway, driveway apron, stormwater system, and landscaping on the property located at 44 Rock Ridge Drive, subject to the following conditions. The applicant shall submit a construction management plan to the satisfaction of the village building inspector and superintendent of public works / village engineer. The wetland permit shall be valid for a period of 1 year from the date of this resolution. However, an extension of an original permit may be granted upon written request to the planning board by the original permit holder or his or her legal agent at least 30 days prior to the wetland expiration date. The wetland permit issued pursuant to this approval shall contain the conditions set forth in Section 245(11)(b) of the Village of Rybrook Code. We'll skip all those. Be it further resolved that no permit shall be issued until the applicant has paid to the village all applicable fees and professional review fees incurred in connection with this application. Be it further resolved, during construction, the village building inspector or superintendent of public works / village engineer may authorize, upon written request of the applicant, minor changes to the approved site plan. Such minor modification shall be consistent with the design and intent of the approved site plan. The architect or engineer of record shall submit the approved changes on a set of as-built plans, which plans shall be maintained in the permanent file of the building department. All changes to the site plan, other than minor changes described herein, shall require approval of a site plan amendment by the planning board. Be it further resolved, all construction shall be performed in accordance with all approved plans and land use approvals. Any approved amendments thereto and field changes authorized and approved by the building inspector, the superintendent of public works / village engineer, or their designee shall be in writing. Any applicant who violates this resolution may be issued a stop work order and summons in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 91 of the Code of the Village of Rybrook. Be it further resolved that this resolution shall supersede conflicting provisions of the Village Code.
Any comments relating to the resolution? Okay. Can I have a motion and a second to adopt the resolution of approval?
Move.
Second.
Mr. Grzan,
Yes.
Mr. Crum,
Yes.
Mr. Mendelson.
Yes.
Mr. Etner,
Yes.
Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
Ms. Schoen,
Yes.
Chairman Goodman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Good
Have a
luck.
great night.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck. Very good. Okay. Yeah. John touched on an issue that we had some discussion about in our agenda meeting concerning this code section that imposes a 2-to-1 mitigation in a wetland buffer. No one could really understand what the origin of that rule is, and it doesn't really make any sense, because one would think that if you're actually constructing within a wetland, there would be more mitigation required. It's almost like we're encouraging people to build in wetlands as opposed to wetland buffers because the mitigation requirement is less.
Now, Rob, I'm sorry, can we slow down 1 second?
Sure.
So everyone can look at the second
Yeah,
sentence
yeah,
now?
absolutely, yeah.
Maybe that was a misprint all along, and we just went along.
Is it like that in other jurisdictions?
We'll find out.
No, not that I've seen.
So we're the only ones that have come up with
I
this?
haven't done like a
I brought
comprehensive
nothing.
analysis of.
I'm sure it was a misprint.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, no.
We're overcoded.
Yeah, but that's the wrong direction.
We're overcoded. Thank you.
Okay, so,
Thank you.
so David, as your last
Oh, no,
act,
I got it.
what,
I just have it.
I mean, what we're really discussing here is the process of the planning board making a proposal to the Board of Trustees to make amendments to the code to address this issue. We have counsel, of course, but it was recommended that we bring you into the discussion.
That was
Hello?
thoughtful. That was thoughtful.
Are we done? Are we done?
No, this is training.
Okay, this is
So-
training. I guess we're still not done. Huh?
Well, we have a quorum, so it's still a meeting.
Right.
No. We didn't adjourn anything. We're still here. Continuing. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
I'm not a cat.
But
We're still here.
we'd like your input on this because you know the legislative process before the Board of Trustees better than we do. I mean, should we develop a report and recommendation for you? What should we do to start moving on this?
I actually, not to take this away from David, but just to take him off the hot seat for a second, I talked to Chris Bradbury about what the appropriate next steps would be. If the board would like to move forward with this, it would be a simple memo that I can draft on your behalf. The chairman can, approve the final language. I can include a draft local law, and then it can be sent to Chris, who can place it on a Board of Trustees agenda for discussion. And David will then be at that meeting and can reflect this conversation.
Okay, so you can go, David.
I was just gonna say, it's very similar to what I told Don Moscato on Tuesday, when there were some code issues involving the zoning. I said, Don, you've gotta bring it to Chris's attention, and then we can consider it.
Right, okay. So this discussion and the information and training that Drew will provide to us is really for our discussion about whether or not, we should really move forward with this, whether or not there are considerations that we should take into account in the drafting of a proposed local law. I think it's a good idea. For some reason, this has been clanking around for years and years and years, and no one has done anything about it. So let's do something about it. We have the time now.
We're an activist board.
We're an activist board, but also our agenda is light, so we can
So
actually.
we're filling.
We can
We're fillers,
actually
right.
spend some
We're
time
plastic
on
surgeons.
legislative actions that may be helpful.
So
Right.
this has been the law for 20 years, the 2-to-1?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, so
And
we're
it
looking
may-
at 245-9
And
mitigation plan
The
requirements.
2-to-1 is out of sync with other villages versus the 1-to-1?
I did not do a full analysis of what everyone else does. What's interesting about Rybrook is if you turn to 245-9, you'll see that if you're actually disturbing the water course itself, it's a ratio of 1-to-1. But if you're disturbing the wetland buffer, it's a ratio of 2-to-1. So
But is
it's
that
more.
Is that because it's? I mean, aren't there other restrictions to building in the wetlands rather than the buffer? Right? I mean, isn't it more onerous upon the applicant to build within the wetlands than the buffer? So there would be more building in buffers, theoretically, than in the wetlands. So couldn't that be the history of why it's?
Good point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Good point.
that's a
we
fine-
don't know what the origin of this is, and I mean, it would be nice if there was any source
History, yeah.
history on
There probably is.
or as to why they, it was passed the way it was passed. I'm concerned about not taking into account of something that should be taken into account. That's what I'm concerned about. So anyway, Drew, give us your legal input on our law and maybe your opinion as to why it is the way it is.
Well, I actually don't know why it's 2-1. I think Scott's points could be accurate, but I don't know. But a lot of I've seen it more often that there is a higher standard of mitigation for impacting the water, impacting the wetland itself or the water course itself compared to the buffer. But that's not to say how the village does it currently is wrong. One of the other things we talked about is you get development on some of these smaller lots, and the goal is to have on-site mitigation. In a 2-1 scenario, it's very hard to you're really cramming it in. Is that actually beneficial to the wetland or the wetland buffer area when you're just kind of trying to cram it all in? Now, interestingly enough, the board's rules do allow you to do, your rules, they try and encourage everyone to do 100% on site. But if it's really impossible, your rules say that you can do up to 50% off site. Part of our discussion was we're running out of off-site
Well, it also doesn't,
areas.
that doesn't make sense to me either.
Right.
I don't think that should be the burden on the homeowner to go to Rich Manor Park and mitigate that. I just don't, I have never understood that, and I never quite agreed with it.
Well, I think, Mike, your point in our meeting was that we're really running out of room. The idea of doing off-site mitigation is not really practical anymore.
No, it's not.
Well, it becomes hard because, as mentioned in our meeting, I mean, the village owns very, very little public
Land.
waterways, wetlands, wet area. Okay, we have Rich Manor Park, we have our detention basin, but, if the goal is for property owners to do mitigation on site, they should try every effort to do it on site as much as possible. I mean, 50% is pretty lenient, We've had some applications just recently that have done pools and things that have done 50% and put the other 50% elsewhere, but maybe 80% that could have been done on site, But we're basically running out of room, and to coordinate this and to do it is just becoming hard at this point.
Right.
And I do have, because I know we have a lot of new board members, and it'd be good for everyone to have a copy. I'm gonna hand out the rules. I'll point to what page.
Our rules of the procedures?
Yes, and the 50%, this all happened in 2021.
Right.
That was
Right.
that new change.
It was actually for the board members that weren't there in 2021. The genesis of the board rules was an application where there was a proposal to do an awful lot of off-site mitigation. And Dan Tartaglia, one of our former board members who was very active on this, basically objected to this and thought that the homeowner had not given it the old college try of trying to do on-site mitigation. And we entered into a discussion where no one really liked the idea of off-site mitigation being the first resort, that too many applicants were resorting to, we'll do off-site mitigation. And the board, I think, thought that, there was really no guidance on this particular issue from the code, but also that we wanted to impose some burden on, make it a little more difficult for off-site mitigation to be the sort of decision of, it should be a last resort or after an attempt had been made. And now we have this issue with the one-to-one, it sort of comes full circle. Because part of the problem with off-site mitigation was precipitated by the 2-to-1 mitigation requirement, which a lot of properties could not really realistically accommodate. So that's the genesis of the board rules. But, obviously, and actually since then, we haven't encountered an application where there was an initial request for a lot of off-site mitigation. I think it happened, but I think we were much more attuned to it and much more pushing back on applicants to do it. And we asked them more pointed questions about, well, what can you do to have on-site mitigation as opposed to off-site mitigation? So we sort of changed the psychology on it, but obviously it's not complete.
So if we went to one-to-one, would we go to 80% on-site or 100% on-site?
Well, it would be more likely to be 100% on-site because a one-to-one mitigation is a much more reasonable type of mitigation. The problem was with the 2-to-1. I mean, you'd have small sites where all of a sudden they were talking about thousands and thousands of square feet of mitigation, and they didn't even have that amount of room on the property.
Well, that also becomes a safety hazard in a way, too.
I mean, didn't applicants bring up this 1-to-1 versus 2-to-1, saying I could have, I also own in the stream bed and I could do a 1-for-1 there? I mean, has this been an issue of applicants have raised or their counsel? Sort of curious to me that they haven't.
They haven't. Well, I mean, the code is pretty clear on this, and then and when there has been pushback by applicants, Michael usually says to them, "Well, that's what the code says, and there's nothing much we can do about it."
Right.
We don't particularly necessarily agree with it, but it says what it says. What it says, and that's a great way of shutting down a conversation. But as a matter of policy, it's obviously something
It's not
that
satisfying, it isn't.
yeah, it's not a satisfactory response to a legitimate question, I think.
Well, I mean, a question is, being that we know when it was modified, maybe we could go back in our files and try to find the minutes or try to find something
reason,
that maybe
yeah.
talks about it. I mean, like what Mr. Mendelson had said, you got more development in the buffers than in actual wetlands. I mean, let's be honest, across the board, we see more buffers being developed with pools or additions right? I mean, I'm here 18 years and I really can't remember when I had a actual wetland
Yeah.
itself.
Wouldn't that be
I would
like a
agree.
federal, dredge and fill permit sort of thing if it went into the wetland itself?
We don't have
So it
a
may
lot of
trigger
federal.
other stuff
It may
outside.
trigger.
There
Wetlands,
was,
yeah.
if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah, go ahead.
the development on Anderson Hill,
Which one told? Okay.
it involved wetland.
Okay, we had two applications. We had a 34 house application.
Yeah.
That's the one? Okay.
Yeah.
So, yes, that involved Army Corps of Engineers.
Right.
That involved Connecticut,
Yeah,
because there were
that was-
Connecticut
yeah, and we
flagged
spent a lot
wetlands.
of time on that.
So,
Yeah.
a lot of work in there was regulated by the Army Corps because there were Army Corps wetlands there. The project primarily stayed out of Connecticut wetlands, almost 100%, as much as possible. It really did stay out of that wetland area, which I still get questions on to this day. Hey, I want to do this, I want to do that. Sorry, it's Connecticut wetlands. You cannot. Well, I want a backyard. Sorry, you cannot. It's wetlands.
Bowman Avenue was
Yeah,
wetland,
David?
too.
I was just gonna say, and I don't have any particular knowledge about this, that the fact that there isn't a whole lot of actual wetland disturbance may account for why there's a difference in the ratio.
Right.
They're trying to discourage
Right,
the
right.
disturbance of the
That's-
buffer.
I think
There
that's,
really isn't a
yeah.
need to discourage the wetland development because nobody's doing it.
and I'm just looking at the Scarsdale code now. It's 1.5 to 1 there. I mean,
In the
it seems
buffer?
in the buffer. So like it seems, and it's just talking about the buffer. And my guess was just what David said is that, you know, yeah, right.
It's just to create an impediment, a discouragement.
Because you're not gonna build in a stream,
No.
right? Very often, I would guess.
Unless you're, unless you're damming it.
Build over a stream.
I think that's given, and that makes hell of a lot of sense. Unfortunately, most of the development or most of the homes that people are coming to renovate because it's an older neighborhood, the only place they can renovate is within the wetlands. And I still believe that 2 to 1 it's very difficult. You just don't have space. And I mean, what this gentleman did today, I don't know if you realize, he's going to remove the beautiful flower beds, all right? And he's going to put in the native wetland plants, which are not really very attractive,
They're not at all.
all right?
The most
But that's what he's doing, all right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay?
But theoretically, they absorb more water and slow down floods.
But actually, Malcolm, this is sort of a question for you and Sarah.
Yeah, that's what I.
Whether or not the 2 to 1, if you looked at it strictly as, is this good for the wetland or not good for the wetland, or does it make any difference? Is the 2 to 1 mitigation, I mean, aside from the fact it may be a discouragement to actually develop in the buffer, does it really have any practical, if it's 1 to 1, 1.5, 2 to 1, after a point in time, does it really have any benefit the buffer at all, or the wetland?
So I think a lot of it is going to be case by case, but overall, in general, yeah, there is going to be benefit. There's going to be better infiltration. There's going to be better habitat for species that live in that wetland, because that's really what you're talking about with the buffer. My thoughts listening to this conversation, and I'm sure that Sarah will help you further this conversation after I've left, but my thoughts in ways of compromise here would be looking at, I mean, I like the idea of 80% on-site, because I think that on-site remediation is much better than off-site remediation. A modification to that could be, it's 1 to 1, or it's 1.5 to 1 if it's on-site, and it's higher than that. It's 2, or 2 to 1 as it is now if you need to go off-site, as a way of encouraging on-site remediation, as a way of asking applicants to look at on-site remediation initially. Another one, because we're talking about smaller sites, right? It is onerous on a 1/4 acre site. You're not doing very much disturbance, but you're doubling that remediation in response. But you do still want those strong numbers with larger applications, with larger impacts to the wetland. Would be a progressive remediation system in which, under a certain amount of square footage and disturbance, that's 1 to 1. Once you go past a certain threshold, you go up to 1.5 or 2 or wherever you want to have that rise to. And that way, on 1/4 acre lots, individual houses, putting in a patio like this, it's 1 to 1. But if you've got a larger commercial project or somebody who is proposing significantly more disturbance in that wetland buffer, your ratio goes up after a certain point, right?
That seems to me to make much better sense.
I like that, yeah. I like that.
It's just being able to draw the
Yeah,
bold lines
based on
as
the
to,
base- yes,
yeah,
yes,
if you have
yes.
to do a whole analysis to
Yeah,
figure out
yeah,
whether it's 1 or 1 to 1 or 2 to 1, then it becomes self-defeating. If there's a very clear demarcation one can make to say that property size or the level of disturbance is the trigger, and there's a principled way of doing it, it does make sense to have sort of a progressive, because we've had, because with the with some of the very big developments that we've had, like the one on King Street, for instance, where there was some wetland, impact there, and we wanted 2-to-1. I mean, they fought tooth and nail against a 2-to-1 mitigation, but that was a huge site.
Yeah.
And at that level, it did make sense to us that sort of the quid pro quo to their being able to put this whole development in was to also do a lot of mitigation, wetlands mitigation. So I think you're correct that those very large projects it's less intimidating to impose a requirement like a 2-to-1
But it
requirement.
almost begs you to maybe said it should be done maybe case on case basis. Rather, maybe planning board get to do some work for a change. Evaluate each site, or the consultant evaluate each site, and we decide as we evaluate the application. Is it going to be 80%, 50%, or 100%?
Well, it's interesting you say that, John, because if we look at the language for the water course, it's a 1-to-1 ratio unless the planning board says otherwise. We could make it 1-to-1 and say unless and that language about unless the planning board says otherwise is not in the mitigation section for the buffer.
Not to get too many things tied together, but how about if you are forced to capture the whole 25-year storm on site? Like this guy put in 12 Coltex? He's doing this property owner, as an example, is already doing a lot versus a big commercial site, which are not capturing generally a 25-year storm on site. So if you capture the 25-year storm on site, maybe it's 1 or 1.5. But, maybe, because I do like the idea of some hard things. If the board has to keep deciding case by case, and that puts staff in an awkward position.
Then it's sort of,
Well, it has to
to
be-
me, that's
So-
game
So your
changer,
capture,
but I don't
my
like that.
thing is, going on Malcolm's idea, is have a threshold, but you're already, you're putting in the 300 square foot shed, okay, it's 1 for 1. But you're doing a huge swimming pool, and now, but you're capturing the 25-year storm on site, maybe it's still 1 for 1.
So that's.
I'm not sure, I haven't thought this all through.
No, but that's what we're not supposed to talk about applications after they left.
Right.
But, as an example, and that's the only purpose, as an example. In this example of this project, their mitigation was 800 plus. I'm sorry, their disturbance was based on 800 plus.
Right.
Okay? Their total on-site was 3,000 disturbance. Okay? Now, we take that into consideration when someone's doing drainage. You're improving drainage from the site.
Right.
Are we going to penalize you because you're digging 10 dry wells on a site?
And that's exactly
And we do
what-
not.
that's
I do not do that.
You don't? I
No,
hope not,
because,
yeah.
no, we do not. Because you're restoring that back to whatever was there. If it was grass, it's grass.
Well, that's why I was asking that
Okay?
question.
And
before.
that's what he's doing. So no, because to me, that's kind of a double dipping. Okay? You're putting in stormwater to meet the stormwater code. Now you're going to be penalized because you're disturbing to do what?
Right.
No.
But the very fact-
My view, how
And
I've
again,
always done it
we
is
don't wanna
that way.
talk about the application, but the very fact that they were containing all that 25-year stormwater on site, to me, that's also a form of mitigation.
Yes, but that's a form of stormwater mitigation, not
Which is-
wetland
which is
restoration.
A much more, many times, much more serious issue to us than, I don't want to talk about the
But
wetland.
Well, listen.
he wasn't building the Coltex in the buffer.
No, initially he had Caltex in the buffer. The DEC regulations aren't favorable for that. We've allowed it in the past because at a certain point, a lot cannot handle everything being 10 feet off the property line. So, okay, if there's a dry well that's 1 or 2 in the buffer and 10 are outside, we'll work it out amongst ourselves. It's not favorable, but we'll be reasonable.
But Mike,
Okay,
it also
so
depends on the percolation test too.
100%. That's all
Where-
taken
where the
into
water
account.
line is.
100%.
Yeah.
But if this dry well is here, okay, and this is the edge of the wetland, if 8 feet of it is in a wetland and
not-
everything else is outside, let's be honest.
It's not really-
Let's be fair. Exactly. Now, if everything is in the buffer and 8 feet is in the regular area, now we got a problem. So we try to be
But
reasonable.
Mike, how many over the course of your experience, how many property owners have not been able to meet a 2 to 1? Has anybody ever been turned away or failed?
Quite a
Because if it's not a problem, not to sound too much like a tree hugger, but why would we, why would we step in and say, hey, let's do less whenever nobody's having a problem with more?
Scott, I think in the last 10 applications, just about everyone they could not meet it on site.
It's been more recent.
Yes.
It's been more recent. In the years I've been here, it's been very recent.
But also why? Look what's happening. There is no more new construction. It's renovations.
Right.
You are
Yeah.
expanding into the buffers.
Yeah.
And that's the only lot space available now.
It's a balancing act between, I want an open backyard, but I want my patio and pool and shed, but yet I don't want to take away my only 25 square feet of green lawn, so I'm going to go off-site. So it's a balancing act, and, people have their various arguments, people have their various reasons, but it's been more recent. I mean, as Mr. Grzan has said, it's probably been within the last 12 months to 18 months.
Mike, if anyone has struggled with the on-site mitigation, have you seen it result in any sort of decrease in the disturbance itself, or they're like, fine, we'll just make this smaller, or that's never the result?
Well, that did happen in a couple of applications where we, what we basically did is change the psychology, because we weren't asking questions about, well, can you put, we as a board desire you to have on-site mitigation. That is sort of like, when we come to the table, that's what, and then you have to show us that you can't do on-site mitigation to do off-site mitigation. So we switched the burden around so that the applicant really began to have the burden of showing that they needed off-site mitigation. And I do recall some applications where we really did push back on that, and they really decreased the amount of disturbance that they were intending to do because we just required it.
I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, it's not. It's not a bad. I guess my concern is that I like the idea of a more principled sort of progressive approach. But at the same time, as an attorney, I'm very concerned about that, because that means that we exercise our discretion, and whenever we exercise our discretion, our litigation risks go up. Because then one homeowner is going to say, well, you impose a 1.5 to 1 ratio on us, but you only impose a 1 to 1 ratio on them, and we believe that our property is comparable, and this costs us a shitload of money more. Sorry.
Totally different angle, if I may.
Sorry about that.
The way we have a tree fund, if you cannot plant the tree on site, you can pay the village into a fund, right, for the trees.
That is correct.
Can we, rather than do the off-site mitigation, why don't we have a financial that you will pay the village so that we will maintain the waterways and the wetlands? Because let's face it, many of these wetlands and the waterways could probably do some cleaning and removing debris and the dead leaves and branches.
But a lot of it's on
But
private
they're
property.
private property.
I knew I knew you were going to come up.
And
Not for that.
That's
That, I think, is asking for trouble and lawsuits.
I think from what I've heard, with a lot of these applicants, they'd be thrilled to pay money as opposed to.
Really? Is that so?
yeah. Oh yeah, they will. Yes.
They take as much money as you want. They
never
can
do
afford
any
that.
mitigation.
What they don't want is the mitigation on their property.
Well, how about sort of a dovetail of that, and that there is a fund that is contributed to, and that fund is really to help finance the village purchasing private lands and turning them into public spaces. That's been, there have been situations where that is, the village doesn't have the resources to do it, but it actually would be in the public interest for that to be done. Well, not exactly an eminent domain
That's
fund.
what it is. It is really not.
Well, no. It would be it would be voluntary. It wouldn't be necessarily the village coming in and saying, you have to sell to us. But it's sort of like there are properties that may be very difficult for homeowners to sell because of topography, because of things like that, but maybe they would be good public spaces. Maybe if the village had the funds, maybe there would be something that could be done. I don't know.
Could
It's
we
a
not,
different
would not the drainage and the wetland performance improve and the buffer zone would be less wet if, for example, Blind Brook is cleaned and the debris and the tires and dams that were from the broken dead branches were being built along the way? If that was to be cleaned up, how much would that? I would love to see how much would that improve. I remember the application not long ago where we went down there and there was a nice beautiful stream going through the property and some sections of that little stream were not really effective, and that's why the ground a little bit foot above the stream was like swamp. You walk through it.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
so,
if there's no if off-site mitigation is becoming something that is not practical, then the next step is to help finance the cleanup and maintenance of what we do have.
Yeah.
To John's point, so it's still would be extra resources for the village to do something productive with.
As an example, those floodplain houses that are possibly gonna get bought out by the
Yeah.
federal government,
Right.
like who's gonna own that land at the end, the federal government? Or is
So-
it gonna be turned into the state or the village?
so eventually the village becomes the property owner of that land and will have the maintenance and the deeds of that property.
So it could go,
Okay.
perhaps, if
Yeah.
there was to be a fund for that.
Yeah.
It sounds like that area was,
So maybe,
A bunch
maybe,
of homeowners
maybe
were
the village
interested,
could
whether-
put in a swimming pool and other people wouldn't have to then.
We do not know what the outcome of that
Right.
program is gonna be.
Right, that's why.
It is currently under review.
You're long enough.
We have about 21 applicants, I think, or 22 applicants on that. There are a couple of houses that did not participate in the program, but we honestly are still about a year's away from anything happening or having an answer on something like that. My only concern with a fund is how it's viewed. Is it revenue? Is it, a grant? Then it becomes monies of the village, then use of public funds on private property. So there's a little logistics behind that we kind of legally have to work out.
I have a problem with that.
So, and then my only other issue is prevailing wage, because I gotta deal with prevailing wage issues. So if the village hires a contractor, we have to pay that landscaper
Right.
$85 an hour to go and dig, because that's what New York State tells me.
I mean,
He has
if you-
to,
yeah.
so there's a few things to consider about that option. Let's try to focus maybe on what the impetus of this was. Let's maybe do a little homework on what other municipalities are doing. Maybe we could find some of the backup to when this was changed and go from there, maybe.
I think Scott raised a good point and derailed our discussion by raising that good point. And to his credit, I think what we should do, and I am sure that going back to 91 or 94 when this law was passed, that there was some background.
Yes.
Or the minutes of the meeting or something, and just find out if that was the reason what Scott said. Well, that was a very good point. Yeah, I would love to find that out.
Yeah.
So maybe we should, because I think it may be premature to, sort of start up a task force or something on this. I think we can all do this sort of consensually all together.
Yeah.
But I think it would be good as a first step to understand as much as we can reasonably
agree.
about
Good
the
night,
law.
Good night.
Take care of David, the law as it exists, to just make sure that there wasn't something that
I agree.
precipitated that, aside from Scott's point, which I think is a good point, and when people aren't, that's a good policy decision, or just make it difficult and create an impediment to the public to do things you don't want them to do. But there may be something more to it than that, and that's what I'm concerned about, is not knowing that.
Yeah,
And
so
then we'll come back and you can give us your findings, either there are or they're not.
Yeah.
And then, and if you do, based on our discussion, Drew, if there is sort of a draft, code section you want to take a crack at, or it may be too premature for that.
Yeah, I don't think we have, I've written down like 4 different options that we've talked about, and so I don't think we have a clear direction to draft that language, and I think this conversation is really good and beneficial, and I'd hate to do a draft that influences you one way or another.
Right.
What I think is that we continue this as a training session. I don't believe we're going to have a meeting in March. There's no applications, right? No applications were submitted. So this will give us a little more time. We'll meet in April. I'll have, I'll work with Tara. We'll come up with the meeting minutes. I'll be able to share that with this board. I'll put together a comparison table of what other municipalities do with their wetlands so we can see kind of sample mitigation programs that exist out there. And then we can come back and talk about these materials and make a decision of if we want to make a change and what change that would be. So this will be, next time we'll do this as another training as well.
Okay.
But I think at the least we should change the language with this 50% on site and 50% off site. Maybe that 50% number should not be there, as something that can be determined almost on case by case basis what percentage would be acceptable to the approval authority, in this case planning board, dealing with the applicant and consultants. Okay, we agree that you should strive for 75% in this case.
Well, so those are in your board rules.
Yes,
And so the language says, to the extent reasonably possible, an applicant should provide 100% on-site mitigation of wetland disturbance. Then it goes on to say, okay, if you can't, and it's not feasible to locate 100% of the required mitigation on site, the planning board may consider a proposal by the applicant to provide a portion of the required mitigation off-site, but such off-site mitigation should not exceed 50% of the total mitigation required. Is that where you want to see change?
I don't like that 50%. I think it may be too high. I think somebody said before, everybody strives, I'm going to go 50% off site.
At minimum, I think our discussions, the board rules, we have control over. And we can change those rules, and they should be changed, because as you come up with new ideas or new approaches, so we have that within our power, and that can also maybe inform legislation at the code level, because we've actually spearheaded this. I mean, our board rules could be sort of the genesis of legislation that comes, because we're actually working on it for ourselves, and it then becomes something that the village can benefit at a higher level. But it's the triggers that bother me. It's like, when do you get 1 as opposed to 2 to 1 as opposed to 1.5? Is there any principled way we can do it? So more of a calculation than an eyeballing. We think, because as we get into a discretionary determination without there being any really hard and fast guidelines that we can hold on to, then we're really sort of in hyperspace in dealing with this issue. And I'd rather have a 2 to 1 than be making these decisions as to whether it's 75 or 50 or 25 or 1 to 1 or 1.25. We've got to have some parameters.
Oh, you got a great idea.
Well, what I like, I agree with you. I think that the idea of instituting a waiver by which the planning board can, on a case-by-case basis, make these decisions gets dicey, and it gets onerous on the planning board, and inevitably you get into a situation where somebody is not being treated the same way that a previous applicant had. Right. And so by a progressive system, what I'm thinking about more is, the first 500 feet as a random number, first 50 feet, the first segment is a 1 to 1 on your property. 2 to 1. 2 to 1?
Yep.
Yeah, you'd want more.
Near the water more, and then 1 to 1.
Oh, you're talking about tiered out from the water.
From the water.
Interesting. Okay. So
You were talking about disturbance. I think you were talking
yeah,
about
I was talking about saying for the first 500 feet of disturbance, your ratio is a 1 to 1, and beyond that, the ratio starts to go up for that amount of disturbance. And then what you've got is a very clear set of rules that is encouraging developers and property owners to minimize their disturbance. Because if I go over 500 feet,
Right.
each square foot beyond that, I have to do 2-to-1 instead of 1-to-1. And then you also have created a system where it is less onerous on individual homeowners and more onerous on larger developers, larger projects with larger scale disturbance.
I think you just developed a progressive tax. That's what we just did.
That's where I'm taking this from.
If-
Yeah.
if the level of disturbance is a good benchmark for this, that's, I think if that makes sense,
That's how we measure it anyway, so.
right. Right. Okay, well, let's take that into consideration.
Yeah, so, am I, Drew, were you saying that we should have this training session at the March meeting? No March meeting.
No March meeting, because there's no applications, so I don't think everyone should just come in for just like fun
Are there
training.
any applications that are, they've already missed their deadlines? I see, all right.
Is
I
this,
get penalized for not being here at March.
for the folks who,
Anything,
You
don't
can
you
go,
feel good?
go to,
I am going.
Europe now.
I'm going Saturday.
no, excuse me.
Yes.
For the folks who have been on the board for quite a while, is this typical that there's such a lack of applications?
Well.
Has something changed?
It has been historically a bit unusual. I mean, we've had our very busy periods and then we've had our less busy periods. This period for the last couple of months has been pretty spare. And the only thing I can figure is that, you know, like we all can sort of figure what's going on. I mean,
I don't think
people aren't
yeah.
buying properties
I don't think people
anymore.
are wanting to spend the money.
Yeah.
And
I
we
think-
also streamlined the
Sales are
code
getting
to get rid of
closer
1
to
and
get.
2
I think
family
that's
homes.
What's happening.
1 and 2 family homes are no longer subject to planning board review from the streamlining local law.
Right, and is that,
And we did
is
that
that
in-
making a big impact?
There is a lot of construction going on that never comes before the planning board.
Well, yes, and I'm thinking of one right now
Because a
that
few
is
years
under-
ago,
We
the
changed.
Board of Trustees
Right.
made changes to the code to streamline
Right,
Yes.
1 and 2 family houses.
Yeah.
So that's what you're seeing, a lot of that is outright and
Yeah.
allowed.
On our,
What normally would have been potentially a planning board item
But
is no
also,
longer a planning
people
board
buy
item.
home, knock everything down, leave the section of the wall, and they don't have to come to the planning board.
right.
on our
That-
neighbor,
It's happening a lot of those.
on our neighborhood ARB in the middle of 2020, for obvious reasons, we saw a doubling of the rate. That lasted 2 or 3 years, and now it's like, it seems like everything got brought forward.
Yeah.
We were doing 20 a year, then we were doing 40 a year,
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden it's dry. So I wonder whether it's like the tech industry, whether a lot of this stuff was like pulled forward, and maybe it'll get back to some
It's
equilibrium.
probably a combination of a bunch of
Residential
different
real
things.
estate is dry, right?
Yeah.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
and,
I
right.
Interest rates.
I
too.
think it's a matter of dollars.
People are not selling their houses, so
No.
there aren't new people
Well,
coming
all
in who
these
want to
things make
renovate.
sense.
you
That's
know?
what I was asking. And
Yeah.
I understand like current economics. I just didn't understand. I didn't know whether historically you had seen dry
It's
spells.
very cyclical, and in fact, I have found that the activity of our board is very indicative of what's going on in the economy. In some ways, we anticipate it because as our applications drop, very often it's for economic reasons.
Yeah.
And then within the next year, there's a recession or something like that. Because a lot of us go back at least a couple of economic cycles, and so we have seen this. And I'm not sure whether this portends a recession or whether or not people are just belt tightening because they really don't know which way to go. But certainly, you know, the hike in interest rates is having an effect on
I
how
think
much
also had a lot to do
activity.
with the lack of open space. There are no more properties.
Basically.
Okay, now, you know, if you wanna build in Rybrook, you buy something old and you build.
Yeah.
You can't find a lot.
Elm Hill is like the last one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much.
That-
Yeah.
Yes.
I will also say that on
Well-
my end,
Durrell is coming in.
I'm seeing applications who can no longer handle their stormwater management on site.
Yeah.
So I'm getting applications who their perk tests are failing. So I'm starting to see these things coming through the grapevine that the board's not seeing. So there is change happening, but we're also seeing a lot of smaller projects, a lot of pools. I mean, the pool industry was buku, you know, last 2-3 years. You do have some tear downs here and there. Very little brand new construction. You have one or two houses here and there brand new, but overall, it's a lot of renovations, a lot of small additions, a lot of repurposing.
I mean, there is no more Belfairs, there is no more the Enclave or.
Well, Durrell is the next big thing, and then the Hilton will be the next big thing.
Very possible, right?
What,
Is there any inkling as to when we'll get plans for
Durrell? Any action on the Hilton?
Yeah, I think everyone's sort of waiting it out. I mean, look at even King Street. I mean, that was a project that, still the issue of financing and what they're gonna do with it. Now, since they've spent, how many years through an environmental impact statement?
It took us about 2-3 years to
Right,
approve that
right. And
project,
now,
yes.
and now is the project economically viable? I mean, that was, to your point, almost from day one, is what was going to happen. Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe 90 million or 130 million.
Exactly.
right.
Pick your poison.
But I think to Matt, to your point, well, are we entering a new era where our role as a planning board maybe needs to be reconsidered depending on what the needs of the village are? That's probably.
Certainly, I wasn't making, I'm just asking a question. I was asking a question about the applications historically. I was by no means making a point.
No, but, I mean, the way I look at things is that institutions always need to change, if there's a basis for their needing to change. And the village, I think, has been pretty good over the years, at least in recent years, in being very adaptable to changing situations, trying to adapt our code. I mean, our stormwater management code is probably one of the most comprehensive around, and is implemented really well. Our wetlands law is the same. So, it is premature to talk about, about structural changes to how the village actually operates. But it's not, but what I'm saying is that it's not off the table. And it is something that needs to be considered over the long run, because, we are volunteering our time to the village. We want to be productive and do things that are productive. We don't want to be sitting around without anything to do because there's nothing to do. So it may, over the long run, we'll see how things sort of flow from here on out. I think it is usually very temporary. But there are things going on that are different than the way they were. It is not just economic. It is, as John says, a lack of space. It's changes in the code that have withdrawn jurisdiction from us. We used to deal with a lot of single-family homes. Now we don't deal with single-family
And
homes.
Matthew, we used to meet twice a month,
Yeah, wow.
twice a month. And there would be about 11:30.
Oh, we used to sit here for,
11:30, we'd be
really.
here arguing at 11:30.
Right.
With 4 more applications.
Right.
I remember being here till after 12.
Yes.
Right.
And
With
7, 8,
Belfair, when
7, 8
Belfair, oh my
items on the
God.
agenda.
But it wasn't too long ago, about a year or so ago, when we were also up until
Right.
about 11
That's
o'clock,
right.
so it's hard to know.
That's right.
But the way I'm sort of thinking about this is that the time that we have now is really an opportunity to think about things like code changes and stuff that
To
we
me,
have
that-
observed
that
can.
Is more what I have always envisioned in terms of what a planning board should be doing. Because they have to be, have a very circumspect view of all this stuff. Planning has to take zoning into consideration. Planning has to take architectural review board issues into consideration. Maybe not as much as we used to. I have an argument for that too. I kind of, I'm not happy about certain things that have taken place. But I don't think there's ever not going to be a role for an informed and progressive planning board, because that would be a huge mistake. We're the ones really who are closest to the master plan and want to see the master plan followed,
Yeah.
at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
I think you're both right. Planning is best done proactively than it is reactively.
Right,
And
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
If you have time, because of a lack of
applications to react to, then
It's,
it is
Right.
best spent.
it's an
Right.
opportunity,
Right.
yeah, it's an opportunity. And in
Yeah.
fact, I think this issue relating to the wetlands and wetlands mitigation, I think it's a really, really good issue for us to sink our teeth into over the next, couple of sessions. But if there are other things that board members, are encountering, that could lend itself to sort of some legislative initiatives. I mean, the one thing I have to say, and it's sort of the credit to the Board of Trustees and the people like David Heiser and the mayor, they really do listen to us.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, we make recommendations and they really do take the recommendations to heart. So if there are things that we notice or Michael and his staff or Drew and her people, if they see things on the ground, like in the building department who encounter everything, they see things that are problems for them. We're a very good forum for that because we have a lot of, I think, collective, good brain power and a lot of historical memory. And we have the facility, we have people that are willing to listen to us. So this is, if we're not completely inundated with applications, this is a really good time to think about that stuff. And I'd really love to be able to amend our board rules again relating to wetlands over the next couple of sessions. But if we can come up with some sort of proposal for, Chris Bradbury, for the Board of Trustees, then that would really be a time well spent, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
what-
agree.
Another idea besides, I agree this is a good one to focus on, but in the idea of being proactive and the idea of space running out and the idea of the master plan, which is maybe 10 or 15 years old, we know there's some large tracts that may be up for redevelopment in the next
Right.
year or 5. If we want to be proactive, rather than waiting for the developer to come forth and say, this is the way I envision everything, yes or no, or what do you think? Are there things in that area, again, looking at the master plan, not just inventing this on our own, to say, we said X amount of that should be open area. Do we really care about that?
Right.
There's opportunities for flood mitigation in some of these properties. Is that, and I know these are private properties, but again, and maybe my favorite thing is flood
The
mitigation.
prime
but-
example was
yeah.
what was done with the Blind Brook a few years back, Blind Brook Club.
Yes.
Yeah, basically rezoned that.
Right.
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying zoning, but like already my understanding is, as an example, the condo community in Narrowwood is putting their head together to say, what do we want as neighbors? And we're in a sense the village. We know this is likely coming. It may never come, but I find it hard to believe, given the lack of
Oh,
land,
it's gonna come.
that it's,
Yeah.
somebody's not, it may not be this developer, some developer's
Yeah.
gonna come forth
Sure.
and do something.
Rye Brook is still very desirable place.
Right, so what would we like? There's flood issues there, because there's retention ponds on that property.
Mm-hmm.
There's open space issues. This is like planning, am I dreaming? But if we want to be
No, it's not-
proactive. is
No,
there
and
anything we
these-
can-
No, it's.
No, and these are some discussions that we're having right now at the
Right.
state level between public-private entities trying to do a little more with stormwater. As an example, up there at Arrowwood, where you have a pond, possibly putting up a dam structure,
Right.
possibly berms. So we are in conversation as we're going through it. Just, it gets a little hard on
Like,
private
How much
property.
do we care about that versus other community interest things? And maybe it's our nature that we sort of have to react to a private developer's proposal.
But other than changing zoning, what else could we change?
Well, we could have, just thinking out loud, we could have an idea to say, we rank flood mitigation near the top of the list versus open space versus recreation versus density versus transportation. What are our biggest things that we care about? Is it like, hey, we don't want to impact, I'm thinking, like, as I look at what Purchase College, that development Purchase College, have you guys ridden by there? Not our village, but adjacent to our village.
Yeah.
The density there is blowing my mind, and I'm thinking about the transportation issues coming onto our local roads.
Where, on down Anderson Hill?
No, Purchase College.
On Purchase College, on the
mean, like,
campus itself,
Is it 1,000
Senior,
units?
it's a senior.
there's a senior
Yeah.
housing development
Right.
being built right
An
now.
active senior, this
It
isn't
is
like,
Oh, no,
hundreds of
that's right.
units,
That's right.
hundreds.
No, this
That's
isn't
like a mini
assisted
city.
living.
Maybe
This is,
that's the
right.
Broadview.
It's
Yeah.
independent living. It's huge independent living going on. And it is, it's good.
That's why ours
It
is
ties in with the other discussion.
moving forward, because there may not be enough people to go into both facilities.
No kidding.
Yeah.
What a
You
shock.
said that 5
I
years ago.
said when they were, I
I'm
told
just-
And
you.
nobody
yeah,
listened
The
to
great
it.
minute
issue.
Anthony
I
came
think why
here,
we
Yes.
care
I
about
told you.
Irrelevant.
And
It's-
they did not
I
want to
mean,
discuss
I
the
mean,
need.
when was
I
the
remember that? No
the,
need.
the
Forget about
comprehensive
discussing the
plan? There was a comprehensive plan many years ago, but I think not.
10,
Well,
15,
I don't know.
yeah.
Time flies, Amy. But when was the last session of comprehensive plan?
God.
It was like, it's like
It's on
8
the
years
website.
ago. or
5, 6, 7 years, I don't
Right.
know.
No, comp plan's more like 10.
Well, for the whole meeting, you mean the individual meetings that were held? Or Marilyn was involved with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when, yeah.
We-
Maybe 10 years, 8 to 10
Yeah,
years.
boy, you know,
Yeah.
it's probably worth,
There's no
particularly in light of
question.
everything that's
I mean,
going on,
we
to revisit
need
that.
that was it's such a good plan. It was such a great document.
Well, that would be a training just to bring it out and have us all read through it.
That's actually a good idea. It's actually a
have-
good idea.
Oh, okay, yeah, I've looked at it.
That's why we gave you next month off.
Yeah, to read the
No,
comprehensive.
but that's actually, Drew and, you know, and even for Sarah and her colleagues, to have, actually a session on the comprehensive plan with maybe, a bias to how the village really envisioned open spaces.
How are we
and
doing?
sees it. I mean, are we, you know,
How
are
are
we
we
missing
doing?
something? Are we on track? Or do we need to maybe change our priorities? As Don, look, we are in a different age now. I mean, flooding and wetlands and stormwater management
Is key.
are becoming really coming to center stage if they weren't already on center stage. I mean, we've had that application, if you remember, not that long ago, where there was a lot of flooding going on, and there were issues between neighbors and the village and the whole thing. It was a real mess, but it really highlighted the fact that there are very serious environmental challenges that are coming to the fore.
When Red Roof Farm, sorry to interrupt you, when Red Roof Farm was developed, one of my closest friends in the world owned that property and lived there for many years. I told them then, I was on the planning board, I said, you have wetlands on that property. No, and throughout the whole planning procedure, they didn't require the devotion and dedication to it then that we would do it now. I'm sure it would be different, and that's why there was so much problems last year, the year before that, in the streets and the flooding and the properties all around the bottom part where it abuts Pine Ridge.
Right.
People have to learn to listen sometimes. You know, they sometimes the aspect of revenue takes precedent over what probably needs to take precedent.
I still feel that, and I'm the oldest one here, so
No,
after I'm
no.
gone, I think the major issue that's gonna face every community, then what you enumerated before is fine, but I still maintain that maybe 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now, the density is gonna be the major issue.
Density.
Yeah, sure.
I think a lot of the community is gonna have to change the zonings,
To make
because
it more
there is
dense.
just
To
not
make
enough
it more-
space.
To make it more dense?
You have no choice.
Yeah, right.
You have no choice. I could see the multifamily homes as being an answer.
Right, right.
Not tomorrow, not day after tomorrow, but maybe 15, 30, 40 years down the road.
No, it's happening in California,
It's
the
gonna
West
happen,
Coast.
folks, so you cannot escape that.
Right.
And we all wanna have a beautiful lawns, beautiful, but there are people coming, that, hey, everybody wants a nice life. And there are more and more affluent people that can afford.
I think our community is in a way ahead of that with the PUDs allowing for more density with some mitigation around it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think we're, in a way,
Well, look,
we
I
have some things.
think
Yes,
that-
but
But
your newer generation coming in takes exception to those regulations.
That's right.
Exactly.
They do.
Yeah.
And, you know, it causes a lot of conflict. Well, what do you mean I can't do this to the brook in the back? What do you mean I can't do that? Why is all of this landscaping so close to my house? So, yes, the PUDs are great, but the newer influx of people moving in take exception to that.
Even on the single-family lots.
Any lot, anywhere in the
The
village.
PUD, I mean, there are regulations that you as an owner can do very few things really to your property.
Yeah.
Right, but that's because of the density.
Yeah.
And it does make things more affordable, which is, I think, part of what you were saying is, we're gonna have to, as a
You know,
society.
when I
perhaps-
have a quarter of an acre land and I pay $40,000 property tax a year, and you come along and you tell me I cannot put a piece of fencing on it, that turns me off.
Yeah.
All right.
But if you knew that going into a new community, it's easier to take, right? Yeah.
So
That's what people get used to over time, I guess.
they get beat into the ground.
getting
Right?
that's-
I don't think anybody gets used to those kinds of taxes.
Well, I think just look at the relationship between people and the land and their property is sort of in flux. And I think that, there's always this battle, we have to deal with it here with every application, the battle between the public responsibility and the public interest and private property owners' entitlement to use their land the way they want to use their land. And it's just increasingly clashing. And part of our battles here are to try to find that fine balance. But I think that we should take a look at the comprehensive plan as sort of a baseline of at least what the village envisioned its future was going to be 10 years ago. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not they anticipated certain things, or whether or not, because you're right, Amy, it does inform us as a planning board, because our big picture view is development. We can't look at a project in isolation of how it is going to affect everything else down the road. And if we don't have any particular direction or knowledge about that, and, the last time I actually read through the comprehensive plan that you and my wife Carol and other people worked so hard on is a long, long time ago. I can't even remember, I'll remember some of the things,
But
but
now there are a couple of these big developments in the works, so to speak.
yeah.
Who is actually looking at these developments in relationship to comprehensive plan? Is the
Right.
developer,
Right.
does the developer have a copy of that? Is the board focused on that? By the time we or anybody else comes to, provide the comments to it, well, the plans are already drawn. And you can't change much. You can tweak there, tweak here, but it's done. So before the developer comes in with the plans, it would be good if somebody sits down, and I'm sure they do at the board level, and say, look, this is what we are looking as a community to have here.
But for very big projects, I mean, with the King Street project, there were a lot of meetings before that application
Yes.
even got to us.
I also think that it isn't
Negotiating
just,
over what was going on
we
there.
can't just look at the village. We've got to look for those kinds of big projects. We've got to look outside the village. Power, utilities. Are they going to be everlasting, or are they going to be running out? Who is Is Con Ed going to be able to handle what's in the future? They can barely handle what's in the present.
Not if we show all the fossil plants in the city, we're not gonna handle.
Okay,
Right? I
but
spend my life in the
in
power industry and
water.
and I don't like what I see.
you talk about flooding.
Okay.
The availability of safe drinking water, supplying these places with water, with gas, with whatever. These are things that we have, as a planning board, we should be paying attention to. Certainly on the big project.
Well, right
I
now,
think-
Con Edison would not provide you the gas. You can build a house, but they're not gonna provide you gas connection. So how you gonna cook?
I think 10 years is a really good
Electricity,
mark to take the
What's in
comprehensive plan off the shelf
Gas.
I think
and
it
look at the
should.
objectives
Well,
and what is
yeah.
outstanding and what is accomplished.
My-
And
It's
my
thrown,
cooking
it's
doesn't
thrown
rely
back
on-
at us, because I remember when the King Street project,
relies
one
on
of their
power.
first early presentations, how their project was consistent with our comprehensive plan.
Right.
So the comprehensive plan can be used as a guide, but for us in terms of development we would like to see. But if the comprehensive plan is really out of sync with the needs of the village, it can be used as a weapon against us. It can be used by developers to try to convince us in a principled way that their development is actually consistent with the comprehensive plan, when it really is not. It's not really consistent with the,
Well,
with the,
not in some of the affordable housing is not consistent with the master plan either.
yeah.
Well, and it's going to be very interesting because the governor has in her budget some strict housing requirements so that everybody increases the affordability and the amount of housing available. And it'll be interesting to see how, Rybrook is not that big of a village, how I think it's like a 3% increase.
Yeah, I think it's 3% across the board.
Well, look
Yeah.
at that big brouhaha we were in
Oh,
years
please.
ago with this lawsuit that was started by, I guess a civics organization where we were under
Right.
scrutiny by the feds, and everyone had to increase their affordable housing, and
Right.
and to our credit, we actually did it.
Well, we did it.
We did it.
Right.
Now we may have to do it even more. I don't know.
So, and that could be another training too, to talk about, we'll see, I always hate to have trainings and presentations on the budget before it goes, because there's so much that gets taken out. Like, this might not come to fruition, but if it does, we can talk about it and talk about what that means and how maybe to incorporate it into a revised comp plan, because the comp plan was done in 2014, so we're looking, it's about that time again.
I got 8 years already.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years.
So we should do, let's pursue what we doing at the top with the wetlands, and get to sort of
Yeah.
more structure on that.
Right.
But also, Drew, I think a session on the comprehensive plan is going to be really, really helpful to us in guiding, the way we look at applications coming to us. And it also may inform changes that we may want to recommend to the comprehensive plan. So, we have a lot of brain power here. Let's use it. That's what I think.
Excellent. All right. Thank you.
Okay,
guys.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good trip.
We have to adjourn, or we are?
Yes. We adjourn. Oh, you need to adjourn?
Second.
Busy.
Aye.
Busy.
Say it again.